On the 2nd of December 2009, the Queen opened the new Ashmolean, following a major museum development. Behind the great 19th century neoclassical facade, which I showed you a moment ago, we've built a 100,000 square foot, 6-story building designed by the architect Rick Mather, whose work you might know from Dulwich, from the Dulwich Picture Gallery, from the Wallace Collection. He was the man who put the roof over the courtyard at the Wallace Collection, National Maritime Museum, or perhaps even his new museum, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. The Ashmolean, as Juliet said, is Britain's oldest public museum, possibly the oldest museum in the world. The only competition we have for this remarkable title is the museum in Basel. The director came to see, it was in Oxford the weekend before last, and we had a clash on this subject. He claims that the Ammerbach collection in Basel was open to the public in the 1660s. I don't believe him for a minute, and told him so. I said it was really only open to the elite of Basel, but the Ashmolean was a truly public museum, and he allowed me the victory, if only for the weekend. Anyway, we have good claim to be the oldest museum in the world, and the redevelopment we've just undertaken has been the most significant event in the museum's long history, since it moved from its first home in Broad Street in Oxford to the present building. That, of course, is the building in Beaumont Street, 1845. Many of you, I hope, will have visited and seen what we've done at the Ashmolean. If you haven't done so yet, I hope you will do so very soon, because I think to walk inside the new building is to be presented with an outstanding example, if I may say, of contemporary architecture, which works seamlessly with the traditional building. And this was the key. I always wanted a building of 2009, a modern building. Oxford has an unfortunate penchant for pastiche, I've always thought. But of course the key then is to make the transition between the 1845 building and the new building. We'll come back to that later. What I want to talk about today is the architecture of the new building, of course, how it's been designed to work for the Ashmolean's very rich and varied collections, and of course on the site in Beaumont Street. But let me just begin by reminding you about the museum's collections. The collections of the Ashmolean date from 8000 BC to the present day. Not a lot from Australasia, not a lot from South America, but otherwise all the great civilizations of the world are present from the Neolithic era to today. Just to remind you, among its great treasures are the greatest collection of Raphael drawings in the world, which you might expect, I suppose, to find in the Uffizi or to find in Paris or in the British Museum, but they're in the Ashmolean. The most important collection of pre-dynastic Egyptian material outside Cairo, and of course the only great collection of Minoan, the Minoan civilization of Crete, outside Heraklion. It was excavated, of course, by one of my predecessors, Arthur Evans, at Knossos, and in those days you were allowed to take some of it home with you, no longer. And, of course, very great Anglo-Saxon collections. Can't quite compete with the British Museum in this area, but some of the most outside the British Museum, certainly the finest of all Anglo-Saxon collections. And less expectedly, extremely interesting, I think, the finest collection of modern Chinese painting outside the mainland of China. A very interesting collection which we show on a rotating basis in a specially designed gallery, which was built up by a very distinguished specialist in the Ashmolean, Mary Tregear, sadly, who died just a few weeks ago, and she bought these. She started collecting contemporary Chinese painting in the 50s and 60s, and we have this extraordinary collection. Originally, of course, the museum's collection was based on the rather idiosyncratic collections of natural history specimens and exotic objects from around the world, which were collected by the gardeners and plantsmen John Tredescant, father and son. John the father, seen a wonderful cartouche of fruit and veg, which was not inappropriate. And of course John resting on his spade. Very important, these were gardeners, plantsmen. This is not an aristocratic collection in its foundation, and they formed a collection they travelled widely, but they also wrote to all captains leaving England in the early 17th century, and they wrote and said, as you travel the world, will you bring back exotic specimens for us? Dragon's teeth and the skins of exotic animals and anything that catches your fancy. But the key to this enterprise was that they said, and it's very much in your interest to do so, because your boss is our boss. And the Lord High Admiral at that moment was the Duke of Buckingham, and the Tredescants worked for Buckingham, and it worked. They indeed got exotica brought back from around the world, and so formed this extremely important collection, which they then displayed, after Buckingham's death, they displayed in their house in Lambeth. And one of the visitors to that collection shown in Lambeth in the early 1630s was Elias Ashmole, quite a different character, not resting at all on his spade. An antiquarian, a lawyer, a man who wrote the first history of the Garter. That's the book that he's holding, and the gold chain beside it was a gift from the King of Denmark, who was a member of one of the Knights of the Garter, who repaid him in this way. So quite a different character, but he showed a great interest in the Tredescants' collection. He helped them write their first catalogue. It appeared first in Latin and then in English in the early 1630s, and it's absolutely key that the Latin word museum is used in English for the first time in that catalogue. So this is at the very beginning of the whole notion of what a museum was. And Ashmole gave his collection to the University of Oxford in 1677 on the understanding that the university would build a building for it. And the building they built, of course, still stands in Broad Street. There it is in Oxford, on 3 floors. On the top floor, I don't have one of those, do I? No, I don't. On the top floor, the collection was shown. On the ground floor, were teaching rooms for the university, for the teaching of natural science, importantly, in the university, and in the basement was a chemistry laboratory, some said an alchemical laboratory, in which my first predecessor, Robert Plott, who was appointed the first keeper of the Ashmolean when it opened in 1683, was the first professor of chemistry in the university. So the collection was seen very much in the context of the scientific syllabus of the university, rather than what we now think of as the humanities. Robert Plott, you would not be surprised to hear, was very poorly paid by the University of Oxford, and that has not changed in any way at all. And he prepared in the basement Dr. Plott's Elixir of Life. You could buy Dr. Plott's Elixir of Life at the front door of the Ashmolean in 1683, and in this way this was the proto-museum shop, and in this way he added to his very modest salary from the University of Oxford. During the 18th century, as for much of the university, it must be said, this was a period in which the collections played a diminishing role in the scientific work carried out by the university. There were relatively few significant. That's the first displays of the inside of the old Ashmolean. And sorry, I thought I had let me go back. And significant acquisitions at that time were few, but with the notable exception, we've just seen it, of the great Alfred jewel, the great Anglo-Saxon jewel, which bears the inscription Alfred ordered me to be made, donated in 1718, and a very important collection which is now passed to the Pitt Rivers Museum of ethnographic material which was collected on Captain Cook's Pacific voyage of 1772 to 5. What happens then in the early 19th century is that the scientific collections, the natural science collections, natural history, geological, botanical collections, go to the new Natural History Museum in South Parks Road, and the art and archaeology collections come to a new building of 1845, and there it is by the architect Charles Cockerell on Beaumont Street. Cockerell, a very interesting figure, who was an archaeologist as well as an architect, man who'd excavated the temple of Bassae in Greece. He knew what a Greek building was because he'd dug one up. This is a thoroughgoing, as you'll know, thoroughgoing Greek revival building. And I think the finest, I mean, more elegant than Smirke's building of the British Museum, and far more external sculptural decoration. A very, very fine neo-Greek building of 1845. Significant changes take place to the Ashmolean in the 19th century, most notably under Arthur Evans' period of office. Under his very energetic leadership, the archaeological collections are expanded at quite a rate, and he moved the ethnographic collections to the newly founded Pitt Rivers Museum in exchange for other material. And as a result of this influx of the collections in the 1890s, Evans built a new building behind the exhibit. He and his great friend Charles Fortnum had made his fortune, of course, in Fortnum and Mason, the Queen's Grocers. They bought the site behind the Ashmolean and developed it. A new extension was built in 1894, and the collections gradually brought from elsewhere in the university to that new building. And it was really in 1908 that formally the Ashmolean Museum of Art and Archaeology was created. The archaeological collections then being housed with the paintings which form the founding collections of the museum. Then subsequently the coin collections previously housed at the Bodleian came to the Ashmolean in 1921 and were set up as a coin room. And as late as 1961, the Oriental collections, Islamic, Indian, Chinese, Japanese collections, which had been housed in the old Indian Institute, were brought onto the same site. We then set up subsequently there was an education service founded in 81, and a unitary Department of Conservation was created in 1999. As Juliet mentioned, I came to the museum as the director in 1998, and like all incoming museum directors, I commissioned a master plan to look at how the building was working, and really identified a lot of problems. And those problems were largely in the area of the new building from the 1890s. It was there that we found essentially the real difficulties, changes of level, so real difficulties with disability access, no environmental control, as you can see, no education centre, so nowhere we could greet the particularly school parties. We were split over 2 sites because we had the cast gallery as an entirely independent building at the back, and really poor. I mean, it was very difficult to control the environment within that building. As luck would have it, in the winter of 1999, part of the roof of the buildings, the 1890s buildings, was blown off in a gale. I blew very hard, and at that point we were able to plan on essentially the demolition of the buildings on that site, and the creation of a new building. And one of the things that I want to concentrate on 2 particular aspects of what we've done. First of all, the way that we've, before I turn to the building itself, the way that we've displayed and laid out the collections. Like many great museums, the Ashmolean has a series of departments. Western art, Eastern art, the antiquities department, which is of course the archaeological collections, the coin room, the great numismatic collections which we hold, and the cast gallery. And traditionally these collections have been displayed on a strongly departmental basis, so areas of the museum have been consigned to these particular departments. And so when you do something as ambitious as what we've just done, which involved knocking down 60% of the museum, clearly you can think very radically, you can think all again about how you display those collections. And as we were planning the new building, I put together a group of curators from across those departments to think about how we were going to lay out the collections. They went away for a rather long time and came back and said, well, there are 6 floors in the new building and 1 is for temporary exhibitions, so we've got 5 floors in which to show the permanent collection, and we have 5 departments, so why don't we do Western art, Eastern art, archaeology? And I said, well, I don't know how to do this. I really don't know how to do this. I come from the National Gallery, and all I've done is to hang pictures, and believe me, hanging pictures is a complete doddle. You know, you put the French pictures there and the Dutch pictures there, and it really isn't very difficult. Of course, art historians make very heavy weather of it, but it isn't at all. It isn't, believe me, it isn't at all difficult. But displaying these kind of collections really is much more complex. And so I don't know how to do it, but I know we're not going to do it like that in the traditional departmental way. And the reason we're not going to do it like that is it seemed to me, and it's long seemed to me, long before I took over this job, that if you do it like that, you cannot help but stress cultural difference rather than cultural contact and exchange. If you put Western art here and Eastern art here and archaeology here, that must be the consequence of the way you do it. So we had a whole series of extremely interesting seminars, not just involving colleagues from within the museum, but also, of course, being part of a university, we could bring in colleagues from other departments, so classics, Oriental studies, history of art. We had a whole series of seminars to discuss how we would do this. And we created a new display strategy, which we've called Crossing Cultures, Crossing Time. And I think the best way to describe this is with an example. An example that particularly concerns itself with the figure on the left. We have a very fine group of sculpture from Gandhara, from what is modern Persia, modern Pakistan and Afghanistan. So this is sculpture made in the 1st and 2nd century AD, and a good example is there on the left, showing the Buddha, but the Buddha dressed in a toga. So this is a very interesting cultural point. This is the point at which, as it were, the classical world meets the world of the new religion coming from the East. So you see this extraordinary figure, the figure of the Buddha. So the iconography is Buddhist iconography, but influenced very much stylistically by classical sculpture. So how do you actually explain to your visitors how that sits? How do you actually place such sculpture within a context in which there is a reference to the classical world, but also, of course, to the later Buddhist Indian sculpture, Indian, Chinese, and Japanese sculpture, all of which we have in the collection. And that was really just an example of the kind of issue we dealt with. So the way you do it, the way we've done it, I hope you can follow this, though I don't have a pointer. There isn't a pointer? Technician? No, there isn't a pointer. As you come in you come in the front. We're on the ground floor now. You come into the first gallery, the Ancient World. It's Ancient World Orientation Gallery. So there's the gallery you meet. places you, the whole floor is devoted to the ancient world, by which we mean 8000 BC to the fall of Rome. So we're dealing with a very large chronological period. So you come into the first gallery and you're introduced to chronologically to the chronology and the geography of the ancient world. And there's a case in the center which talks about the movement of people and things about the ancient world. And it makes the very simple but very profound point that people and things move about, they are traded, and there's migrations through the ancient world which are greater perhaps than many of our visitors imagine. You then turn left, because people in public buildings in this country always turn left. We did the research, and so we know that that is indeed the case. So you turn left, and then you go through a series of galleries: the Aegean world, the ancient Near East, ancient Cyprus, European prehistory, Greece, Rome, Gandhara, India, China, Japan. So, sorry, and Japan's somehow not there, but Japan finishes that route through the ancient world floor. So essentially you provide a narrative through the ancient world which places the sculpture of Gandhara between the sculpture of Rome and that of India. So you provide a context for it, and you provide a clear narrative for the visitors. You then, yes, so that perhaps makes the orientation clearer in that slide. But essentially, we lay out the collections in that narrative, as it were, which makes clear, I think, the relationship of Gandhara to classical sculpture, but also to the Buddhist sculpture of India. And then this approach is really worked through on the other floors there. And then I'm actually going to go up to the next floor. And then the same approach essentially works on the next floor. You go up to the next floor, you see that gallery called Asian Crossroads, the orientation gallery. That floor essentially takes you from the fall of Rome to the High Middle Ages, and you do a similar route through the collections. And then indeed on the second floor, the same thing happens. Again, you're introduced to the East meets West gallery, which is all about essentially the relationship between Europe and the Far East from the 16th century into the early modern world, and there is a similar route. You at that point also move into the old building, into the 1845 building, and we have retained, because it's appropriate really for the architecture of the building, and because that's how those galleries were first used, we've retained, as it were, the traditional look of those galleries and the run of Western European painting and decorative arts. Let me just go back. If you go downstairs, if you go to the lower ground floor, we have essentially, that's more thematic in character. As you see, the Arc to Ashmolean is a gallery that tells the story of the remarkable story of the museum from the Tredescan collection to the present day. The Human Image Gallery is an introduction to our collection, very rich collection of sculpture. The Money Gallery, of course, is where we display our numismatic collections. And a very favorite gallery of mine, the Textile Gallery, is where we show our very rich textile collections, which we've never ever been able to show before because we simply didn't have the environmental control to put them out. And there you'll find there's one of the Central Asian textiles that in the top left-hand corner, but certainly there we have the Newbury collection of medieval Islamic and Gujarati textiles, the great Central Asian collection, and Lawrence of Arabia's robe, sacred object. So let me now just look at the actual to the architecture of the building. This, of course, is an aerial view of the museum. The pink part as you know, is the Cockerell building of 1845. And remember, of course, that the wing here, I mean the east wing is the Taylorian Institute for the Teaching of Modern Languages in the university. This is a rather curious arrangement which dates from 1845. The university was given a benefaction to build a museum and given a benefaction to build an institute for the teaching of European modern languages at the same time, and they put the two together, and our neighbours are still in the Taylorian Institute. I asked actually to knock down their lecture theatre, but they suddenly decided it was a very important lecture theatre in the history of lecture theatres, and so they wouldn't let me do it, sadly. The new building, very interestingly, can scarcely be seen from the street, and it's only really inside that you get the sense of the experience, the architecture, really the light and the great open spaces at the heart of the museum. What this, I think, makes clear is what a tight site we're dealing with. It's built up here, right up to the Taylorian, along the back to the new Classics Centre of the university. The Cast Gallery, which is the lower building at the back, it belongs to us, and we've established a connection. You go now from the main building through to the Cast Gallery, the Oriental Institute, just beyond it, the Sackler Library. So this is a very, very tight site, and what the architect had to do was to really squeeze as much space as he possibly could out of that very tight site. And this shows you perhaps that even more clearly. That's when we demolished the 1890s additions and began to, we then went down a floor. We created a lower ground floor on that site. And this, you see how very clearly how enclosed and difficult this is as a site to work with. We started the work in September 2006, and as I said, opened in December 2009. And here are some shots of, I'm going to take you through the building, through the great portico by Charles Cockerell. One of the key features is we've opened up the front door to its full height. This is a very curious feature of the Ashmolean. These large open doors, the large front door, had been cut in half. I think probably between the walls, and I think probably for the very simple reason to stop birds flying into the into the museum. However, when I proposed to open it to its full height, of which is about 6 meters, there were many complaints that that actually it had always been half open. Of course, when we actually then looked at the hinges and so on, it was quite clear that it was Cockerell's intention that it be opened to its full height. And it has the effect of bringing light into the new building. And here we are inside the new building, inside the building, standing actually in the Cockerell space, but looking through to the great atrium created in the middle of the building. And here we are then at the heart of the new building. And the key to the way the building works, and I think it's very interesting, as I said at the beginning, I wanted a contemporary building, but it had to, of course, the architect had to manage the transition between the old building and the new building. And what essentially happens in this building is that the old building defines the space in the new building. So you go through on the flat from the old building to the new building, on the ground floor and on the first floor, and that gives you a natural gallery size of 6 meters. And there are on this slide you'll see there's a 6 meter gallery. In fact, there are 3 6 meter galleries. They're stacked, one on top of the on top of the other. And then from those we break off 3-metre galleries. So there's a rhythm of 6, 3, 6 all the way through the building. It's a grid on which the building works. And in order to keep the 3-metre galleries as high as we can, all the services are taken down through the walls. So you have very thin ceilings so that you can keep your gallery heights as high as possible. And I hope that those who've been into the museum will agree that that works well. I mean, there is no, you have to be careful with 3-metre ceilings. It was one of my great concerns, I must say, as we planned the building, that they would seem in some way claustrophobic, but actually, because there are always views out, and because we kept them as high as we can, it works well. You can also see on the photograph that we've gone down a floor. Again, another constriction that the architect had to work with the space was we could only go down one floor because the water table in that part of Oxford, we could only go up to a certain height. We could only run to 6 floors because it was a condition of listed building consent. It was a condition of knocking down the 1890s buildings that you shouldn't see the new building as you approach the old building. So as you come up to Cockerell's great portico, you don't see the new building at all. All this sits behind the neoclassical facade. But that again was a constriction, of course, on what the architect was able to do and how he very cleverly manipulated the space. And then these bridges, of which you get a glimpse here, and you see 2 of them very clearly on the right-hand screen. Those bridges take you across from 3-metre gallery to 3-metre gallery, as it were. And another great feature of the building, I think, is that you don't have major floors and minor floors through the building, all the floors, because they all have both 6-metre and 3-metre galleries. So there's no sense of major and minor floors, which was very much a characteristic of the previous building. The other feature that I particularly wanted in the building was a sense that you could easily orientate yourself within the building, so you knew where you were in the layout of the total building, but also that you had vistas from one gallery to another, so that you are not only intrigued by what you saw. So as you stand, for example, in the Islamic gallery, you can see a glimpse of the musical instruments, you can see the Stradivariuses, and of course you're drawn towards them, but also that you can actually make clear points. So again, in the Islamic gallery, as you stand in the Islamic gallery and you look at the whole run of tin glaze ceramics, you can look to the European ceramic gallery, which of course has lusterware and maiolica, which is exactly the same technique. So you can make that connection very clearly through the vista. Also, we've used between galleries what were originally planned, and the original plans were just vistas through. We've actually used those in certain cases as showcases, to create showcases, and we put in that material which link 2 galleries, which provide just that kind of cultural contact and exchange which I've been speaking with, which is a key feature of the way the collections are laid out. I hope you're visualizing this, but of course the key thing is to come and see it. Yes, this is looking down then through the building, which gives a very clear idea of looking down into the atrium of the building, and it shows you the staircase, which steps back as you go up into the building. So it opens up the staircase to a great skylight at the top, which brings light all the way down through the building. And this is particularly important in the lower ground floor, because if you're going to use a lower ground floor as a principal public floor, as we've done in this building, clearly you need to bring light through the building down to it. Otherwise you get a dark basement, which is clearly not the effect that you want to create. And so to bring light down through the building, he's stepped back the staircase to open it up to an enormous 13-metre skylight at the top of the building. Yes, and this is the Islamic gallery, which then looks, you can see the staircase as it steps up, and you can clearly see a number of the vistas which have been created within that. within the building. Up on the top floor, in addition, of course, to a glorious director's office, which was the motivation of the entire undertaking. On the top floor is also a very fine run of conservation studios. It was a very striking feature of the old building. We had very poor conservation studios. We have a very distinguished conservation staff, a large conservation staff. It's actually the largest department in the museum, but we've really given them splendid working conditions. As you can see, they're right on the top of the building with great views over the city, with very fine north light, and so this is really a huge boon to a very distinguished department. We also have, and I hope you'll be tempted to use it. I haven't got. It's actually empty at this point. It's usually buzzing. We've created a restaurant at the top, which has a terrace, as you see, that goes out, and you can sit out in the summer on the terrace with a view, again, views over Oxford. And it has proved to be a great success. We, of course, as you must be when you put in almost a decade of work and spent over £60 million, we waited for the publicity that we created the reviews with some anxiety, of course. But as you can see from the reviews that I've just run through, we had an extraordinary reception for the building. I mean, I was delighted. The building provides 39 new galleries, and 4 for temporary exhibitions, which I'll come to in just a moment, 35 for the permanent collection. We've created a much-needed education centre. We've created, for the first time, astonishingly, for the first time, a loading bay. I mean, a museum of the size of the Ashmolean, the importance of the Ashmolean, didn't have a loading bay. Everything had to come down the staircase, across the across the forecourt, into a lorry parked on a double yellow line in Beaumont Street. I mean, this was no way to move Titians about. And we've now created a proper loading bay. We have a series of study rooms. Of course, the Ashmolean is the greatest of all university museums. We do a lot of teaching, university teaching in the building. We've created new study rooms, which are marvelous because people can teach from the object. And so, I mean, if, for example, you wanted to teach a class on Chinese greenware, you would take your class and look at the public gallery where the selection of the collection is shown, and then you would go to the study room, and the study room is next to accessible storage, and comparable pieces of greenware are brought and put on the table in front of you. And there's nothing, I'm sure, I hope many of the audience have experienced this, but there is nothing quite like being taught from the object. I must say it's what turned me from a historian into an art historian, was actually sitting in the Bodleian and looking at illuminated manuscripts. And the same is true of teaching, of course, from ceramics and from drawings. I mean, of course, many teaching classes take place in the 2 print rooms. The print room not just for Western drawings, but also for Eastern works on paper. Storage, of course, we've also created enough storage to store all the major collections. There are 1 or 2 of the less interesting archaeological collections are stored off-site, but essentially we've created a lot of storage space. 2 offices, of course, the conservation studios I've shown you, the restaurant I've shown you, and of course throughout this huge building the environment is controlled. So we awaited the press launch. We launched on the 28th of October 2009, and we had a whole series of press launches, but we were absolutely thrilled by the reception. Jonathan Glancy, for example, writing in The Guardian, said the new building brought fresh life to the Ashmolean and to Oxford, a fine new public place, a museum to return to time and time again. Key among the facilities that the new building provides us with are, of course, galleries for temporary exhibitions. The exhibition program which we've launched consists of 2 major shows a year, one in the spring and one in the autumn, and between those 2 major loan exhibitions we put out smaller, more specialist displays which are designed to showcase the museum's very extensive permanent collections which we can't normally display. I'm often asked the question, what percentage of the collections of the Ashmolean are on display? It's a difficult question to answer because it depends on the kinds of collections, of course. I mean, in the terms of old master paintings, I suppose 80% of our collection is out. In terms of the Chinese greenware, it's probably only 20% of the collection. So with a series of smaller focused exhibitions, of course, we can bring out those collections and show them to our visitors. And it's another way, importantly, of showcasing the research that goes, I mean, as well as teaching, and all the curatorial staff and conservation staff of the museum are involved in university teaching. It's also a great deal of research goes on in the Ashmolean. We have a whole series of research projects underway at the present time, and of course it's one way that you can showcase that research. So it's a very important way, it seems to me, that academic research can be put across to a broader public who one hopes can see the value of this research in the form of focused exhibitions of this kind. The first significant exhibition we did, which I hope many of you came to see, it's not very far from High Wycombe to Oxford, even by bicycle, which ran from September to December last year, was the Pre-Raphaelites in Italy. I show you the great central gallery of our temporary exhibition displays with this extraordinary group of paintings which show the preparatory works for Burne-Jones's great mosaics in the American church in Rome, largely lent by Andrew Lloyd Webber, who's a great collector of this material, and opened up his collection and lent his collection very generously, much of his collection, to this exhibition. It was a collaboration, and that's important. We're establishing a whole series of European relationships. It was a collaboration with the Museo Civico in Ravenna, where the exhibition showed before it came to Oxford. It was a great success. We then did, just to give you a sense of these smaller, more focused exhibitions, we have a major archive, of course, of Pizarro in the Ashmolean. An interesting feature of the collections. Lucien Pizarro, who's the son of Camus, came to live in England, live and work in England, and his widow gave the entire family collection to the Ashmolean. Rather a puzzle, because we didn't have any. It's very difficult to know why she thought of the Ashmolean, because there are no apparent contacts between the family. However, we were very pleased to have them, as you may imagine, and we will do a series of focused exhibition on aspects of the Pizarro collection. And here, as you can see, Lucien Pizarro set up a press, very much on the model of Morris's press, the Kelmscott press, which produced 30 books handmade books between 1895 and the First World War, and we did an exhibition which focused on that. We held many of the plates, all the preparatory illustrations, the sketches for the illustrations in the books, as well as copies of the books themselves. And there you can see, actually, on the screen, you can see a portrait by Camille of his son Lucien. The present exhibition, and let me urge you to come and see it, is our first major archaeological exhibition. This is called Heracles to Alexander the Great, which features more than 500 extraordinary recent discoveries from the ancient city of Aigai in northern Greece. This is the modern name of this town is Vergina. It's to the northeast of Thessalonica, and this was the capital of Macedonia, of ancient Macedonia. It was the capital of Philip of Macedon, and the key discovery, which was only made in the last few years, is of the tomb of Philip and of Alexander the Great's son, Alexander IV, and two other royal tombs in an enormous tumulus at the center of Vergina. It is a most extraordinary exhibition. We are very privileged to have it. Much of this material has never, all of this material has never left Greece before. Much of it has never actually been exhibited in Greece before. It comes to us before it goes to the Louvre, which seems absolutely right to me. And so it is part of these international connections which we're beginning to establish. Do come and see it, because this is an exhibition. I mean, it was described as a show of the summer in the Telegraph. Robin Lane Fox described it as the most stunning loan exhibition ever to have come from Greece to Britain in the FT. So I hope that you will come and see the exhibition. It does rewrite the history of early Greece. Just one or two other, and that's another. I mean, I could talk. I'm not, as Juliet has said, I'm not at all an archaeologist, but this is a hugely exciting exhibition. And here on the wall, I mean, just to give you one example, this is of course a photograph, not the actual fresco, but this is a fresco, a Greek painting before there was Greek painting. I mean, it really is absolutely extraordinary discovery, these frescoes. I mean, it is a fresco technique which have been found in these, and we're talking, this is 450 BC, so at very, very, and what you see, and it becomes clear that what you see in Roman painting is in some way just a pale shadow of what Greek painting, which we've never seen before except on vases, was. A number of other initiatives that are underway at the Ashmolean at the moment, which I'd like to just to touch on. We have just launched this, recently launched this Yusuf Jamil Center for Islamic and Asian Art. This is Eastern Art Online. This is a new website of our Eastern art collections, particularly our Islamic collections. And this, if you please do have a look at it, because I mean, the level. I mean, the photography is at a very, very high level indeed. There are many features on the website. You can zoom in. You can actually, I'm embarrassed to say, you can see things better on the website than you can see them, or at least in more detail than you can actually see them in the museum. It doesn't, of course, obviate the need for a visit to the museum, but really, if you're studying individual objects in the collection, it's hugely, hugely valuable. And only last week, we launched a new website, which of course you reach from our main homepage, on the Ruskin collections. Ruskin, one of the great figures in the history of the Ashmolean, of course Slade professor in Oxford, and he gave his collections to the Ashmolean. He created teaching collections. It's a very interesting story. He created teaching collections for his teaching as Slade professor in the university. His own drawings, but also works, of course, by Turner and his contemporaries. I mean, and a whole series of works which, as you can see here, he grouped together as part of his teaching, the lectures he gave as Slade professor. And, of course, subsequently, these were then dispersed in the original sequence in which he used them. So the Turners simply went into the Turner box, and the Ruskins went into the Ruskin box, and the Tintoretto went into the Tintoretto box. And so that sense of a teaching collection, the way that Ruskin thought and used the collection, was lost. And so we've actually reconstructed that within this website. It's really his teaching collections online, and then there's a whole section in which contemporary artists respond to these collections. So for those of you who are practicing artists in the audience, I mean, that is a particularly interesting feature of this new site, which we launched last week, so I'm very proud of it just at the moment. This is and continues to be a very busy year at the Ashmolean. we have now embarked on phase 2 of this huge undertaking, and this is the redisplay of our Egyptian collections. As I mentioned right at the start, the pre-dynastic collections in the Ashmolean are unique outside Cairo, hugely important. I mean, this is 4000 BC. Very interesting. These collections came to the Ashmolean essentially because they were turned down by the British Museum. There's a wonderful letter from Wallace Budge, who was the keeper of the Egyptian collections in 1900, in which he writes to Flinders Petrie, who was excavating this material. He writes, we don't want to take this material from the British Museum because it is not so much prehistoric as ahistoric. And we were, and the Ashmolean was the beneficiary, therefore, of receiving this material. And of course, it's now exactly what people want to study. It's the very beginnings of Egyptian culture, and therefore of absolute key importance. So I've always felt, for many years as a visitor to the Ashmolean, long before I was a member, joined the staff, that we simply didn't punch our weight. I mean, these collections were not shown to their best advantage. So it's always been my idea that, and these of course are housed in the historic building, that we would do this as phase 2 of the undertaking. This is the old, some of the old displays, and of course, we all have, among other things, we have a temple. This is the only Nubian temple outside Nubia, which was given to the professor of Egyptology in the University of Oxford to thank him from the then Nubian government, to thank him for the work that he'd done on the history of that country. I mean, they gave him a temple, and it was brought back in pieces and reassembled, of course, in the Ashmolean. I did have a dream at one early stage of the whole undertaking that we would actually put this temple in the atrium area, but I was then told that the foundations of the building had been reinforced to take the temple, and there was nowhere else that it could go, which was a great disappointment to me. I thought it might have looked very well in the atrium. However, we're now redisplaying that whole area of the museum. We've moved, for those of you who know the museum well, we've moved the shop downstairs, and the great gallery that had the shop in it, the Ruskin Gallery, which is where, incidentally, the Ruskin School was in the years after the war, certainly. We're going to use that very, very handsome and well-lit gallery to show the pre-dynastic collections. That is all underway. That's one of the architect's views. We're using the same architect for the work we're doing in the Egyptian galleries. We're using Rick Mather once again. That will be complete, that work, and I had a report from the project manager this morning, so I can tell you it will be. That work will be complete by the last week of November. So we will reopen the Egyptian galleries for the new year. Well, in fact, open them in the last week of November. So we have, in these years, transformed the museum, increased its size, doubled the size on the footprint at the back, redisplayed the first floor collections of, as you've also seen, the collections of Western art, of the paintings collection, the decorative art collections have also been redisplayed in the historic building. So an enormous change has taken place in the Ashmolean. We're very pleased with the reception. In the first year, we had 1.2 million visitors. This is an enormous figure for a museum outside London. It was 4 times the previous. We had 300,000 in a good year previously. So in a way, there's been a step change in what we've been able to do, and indeed in the public response to the Ashmolean. But of course, its function, its key mission, is still absolutely the same as it was when the Ashmolean was opened in 1683. It remains exactly the same as its foundation in the 17th century, to make these extraordinary collections available for study, for learning, for enjoyment of as many people as possible. There's a wonderful, we have visitors' books for the first Ashmolean, for the first years of the Ashmolean at the end of the 17th century. And if you look through these visitors' books, you'll see that many people who had to sign in to come to the museum signed with a cross. So many ordinary illiterate people were visiting the museum. And if you look at these visitors' books, you'll see that on one day in the week, it's Wednesday, on Wednesdays there are more visitors than any other day in the week. And you might think for a while why that should be. And of course, it was because that was market day in Oxford. People would bring their goose into Oxford, they would sell their goose, and then they would go to a museum. And that seems to me just the way it should be. So I would warmly encourage you to come and visit us in Oxford. And of course, absolutely key to the future, to the museum, its success and its future, is that admission, as it always has been, is free. Thank you very much.